Sauerkraut. What's the deal? Why is it so good for you? Why do we keep hearing about fermented foods like they're the new superfood? Well, they're actually the old superfood. And today we're going to talk about why fermented foods are so amazing for you and how to make your own sauerkraut. So why are fermented foods so fabulous for us? I'm sure you heard a ton about them. There's always new articles and new recipes coming out for them nowadays. And I just wanted to dive in a little bit into this mystery and give you some clear ideas as to why they're so beneficial for us, why I love them and eat them all the time, and then how to make your own, right? And I wanted to start out with the most basic, so how to make your own sauerkraut. This is my own jar that's been fermenting for a few months now in a cool, dark place in my house. So let's jump in here. So fermented foods, and why I said they are the old superfood, they're not really a new superfood, is because we have been fermenting things as long as humans have had food on this planet. I mean, it's been a really, really long historical tradition that's only getting revived lately. I'm sure some of you too even have grandmothers or mothers or great-grandparents that would ferment their own sauerkraut or their own vegetables. So it comes from a really, really basic need that we had, and number one is preservation, right? So we didn't have fridges back then. We didn't have the same kind of cleanliness standards. It was a little bit dirtier and grimier, which could actually be a little healthier for us, depending on what was in the soil. But so fermented foods are a wonderful way to preserve foods. So not only do they keep forever, as long as they're stored in a cool, dark place, they're wonderful in terms of safety, in terms of food eating. So we'll get into that. That's a little combination with probiotics. If something was fermented, we knew that it was safe to eat because the good bacteria start to outnumber and outgrow the bad bacteria. So that was a massive boon to our ancestors, right? So, and we hear about Vikings drinking mead all the time, and maybe Middle Ages folks drinking beer a lot, and of course the Irish women using Guinness during pregnancy as a nutritional drink because it's high in B vitamins, which it is. But if you think about it, those fermented beverages and foods were safe because of their lack of bad bacteria, because the fermentation process guarantees a growth of good bacteria that's going to help out our immune system, our digestion, our skin health, helps with autoimmune disease, they're anti-inflammatory, all kinds of amazing things, right? So not only do we get those health benefits, but we also get the peace of mind knowing that drinking and eating these things were safe for us and they weren't going to give us a foodborne illness, which could be deadly back then, if there was a lot of dehydration that happened, or you weren't able to eat over the long term for a certain reason. So so fermented foods have played a really important part in our history, and unfortunately only recently have we kind of gotten out of using them with all the kind of pasteurization techniques and the fear around microbes, which unfortunately, yes, there are some bad bacteria and some pathogenic ones, absolutely, but a lot of them are really, really important for our health, and we're discovering more and more about that, and the fermented foods have been around forever, helping out our health overall, and not only keeping us, also keeping us safe. So preservation, important in the old days, important now, right? You can ferment things, vegetables, you can even ferment fruits, and they can be delicious, and they can keep for many long months over the winter. Maybe not totally necessary since we have a lot of food around all the time, but if your favorite thing goes out of season, feel free to pickle it, preserve it this way. And I think another really important note about the preservation technique here is that I use a lacto-fermented technique, which does not involve dairy, even though it sounds like it does. So a lot of things that we buy in the store that we might think are fermented, I think the most common is pickles, is actually preserved in vinegar, which does not encourage probiotic or good bacteria growth. So it does preserve things, but it's not the same as a simple salt fermentation, which is what lacto-fermented is. Lacto refers to the good bacteria that grow. So sorry, the lactobacillus that grow. So lactobacillus is that really important probiotic that it likes a little bit of acidic environment. The fermented foods are definitely a little bit tangy and acidic. And that's the one that we have the most research on to date about how it helps all of those benefits that I mentioned before with skin health, GI health, immune system, all of that great stuff. So, and the nice thing about fermented foods too is that they can grow a lot of different strains of the lactobacillus and other bacteria, and they can be quite potent. They're a wonderful, medicinal, delicious thing to eat daily instead of maybe taking a probiotic supplement. Sometimes the probiotic supplements are really helpful, especially if you've got kind of an acute medical condition going on, or maybe your doctor or naturopath has recommended them. And I did do a video on how to pick out a good probiotic if you're not sure how to, and I'll put a link to that in the comments or the notes below. But eating fermented foods daily can really help get that probiotic concentration up for you. And of course, it's not just sauerkraut. You can do kombucha. There's something called water kefir, which is easy to make too. Maybe I'll do a video on that in the future. Yeah, vegetables are going to be fermented grains. There's fermented dairy, of course, with kefir and yogurt. So there's a lot of different options and different products to get into your diet. It would be amazing to try to eat some of a fermented food every day to get your dose of probiotics and keep that immune system and GI up and working. So another benefit is increased absorption. So the cool thing about fermenting is that it breaks down the food a little bit and it makes its nutrients more bioavailable and easy to absorb, which is fabulous, right? It's good for all of us, but it's especially wonderful if we've got any active GI conditions that maybe we already have trouble absorbing to begin with. So the increased absorption factor just increases its nutrient density for you. You get a lot out of these fermented foods. There is one population of GI folks that fermented foods are not usually recommended for, which is those with histamine intolerance, which is a very, very specific and small subset of the population. But fermented foods are high in histamine, so they can kind of trigger some issues around that. So that's, if you know you have a histamine intolerance, that's kind of the one time that I would not recommend eating fermented foods. But otherwise, man, have at it, go for it. They're tasty. And then fourth, they're very budget friendly. This cabbage, was a couple bucks. That's it. I had to get a jar, but that's all there is to it. And most of the time when you look for fermented foods in the grocery store, now there's a lot more coming out with like kimchi, that's outside of just Asian markets, sauerkraut, asparagus, all kinds of things. It can be quite spendy for a little amount, because the trick with fermented foods is that they have to have time to ferment, and that is expensive, right? If you're not able just to make something as a food manufacturer and send it out the door, if it has to sit around and age and ferment appropriately, then it's going to cost more in the store. So making your own ferments is fabulous. It's super cost effective. It's just pennies on the price of what you would pay in the store. And then you also get to decide how long you want to let things ferment, which is fantastic. I've read studies that show that a month is kind of the minimum amount of time you want to let it ferment to really build up the great bacterial cultures. Many books I read also say, go ahead and eat it after a week. So it really varies. Personally, I think it tastes much better if it's been fermented for at least a month. And again, the fermentation depends on your conditions. So if it's in a warmer space, it's going to ferment faster. And if it's in a cooler space, it's going to ferment slower. So I typically kind of do a cool, dark space, just like you might know your grandparents would bury their sauerkraut crock underground, cool, dark. That's how I like to do it too. I have fermented things a little bit warmer, but I don't know, I kind of like it in that cold, dark, low, slow place. So you kind of have to stay on top of it if you're making it and you really love it, because you have to have about a month lead time. But that's the beautiful thing about ferments too. It's really individual. There's no super strict set way to do it or recipe. I will certainly give you a recipe for how I make my sauerkraut, but it's adaptable. It's a make it your own type of thing. Adapt it to your own tastes and preferences. So, okay, let's move on from the fermented foods. I wanted to talk a little bit about cabbage. I feel like cabbage is an unsung hero of the vegetable community. It's really kind of just, I don't know, pushed off to the side, and I don't know. I have this memory of, did you guys ever watch the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory growing up? Where the grandparents were all sitting in bed and they had cabbage soup and that's all they were eating. That sounded really gross to me when I was little. And that's been my association with cabbage until I really started making sauerkraut. So I get it if it seems a little bit off-putting, but feel free to put those prejudices aside if you have them and look at cabbage in a new light. Cabbage is really fantastic. I think most people don't realize that it's part of the cruciferous family of vegetables, which includes ones that get a lot of press about being super healthy for us, like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, right? Of course, we see kale everywhere nowadays. So the cruciferous vegetable group is incredibly important for us. So I've written here that it has sulfur compounds. That's just one of the many things that the cruciferous vegetables have for us. But the sulfur compounds in particular are fabulous for liver health, for joint health, for hormonal health. They're super, super important. Oftentimes, if there's specific hormonal imbalances for women, I will recommend eating more cruciferous vegetables, and just doing that, sometimes that can balance it significantly. So they are powerful stuff. And then they're also, cabbage is quite antioxidant rich. So even just the green cabbage, I think we think of antioxidants as, oh my gosh, it has to be dark red or black or this blue, whatever, that kind of tells us how many antioxidants are in there. And that's actually not true. Those are kind of the ones that we see the most often, but they've done research on even white potatoes and found that white potatoes have antioxidants. They just maybe aren't as colorful as some of the other ones. So green cabbage is the same way. Red cabbage, of course, antioxidant rich, just a different type of antioxidant. So the antioxidants, of course, are going to be cancer preventative, anti-inflammatory, wonderful overall, right? The main purpose of an antioxidant is to scavenge free radicals, which are produced by metabolic reactions in our body all the time, not just cancer. So antioxidants are just such a wonderful thing to have in your diet overall, and they're really going to help blood vessel health as well. Antioxidants are incredibly important to the circulatory system health. So another really amazing thing about cabbage, this is kind of an old-timey naturopathic trick or remedy, is that it's glutamine rich. So glutamine is the food that your GI cells prefer more than anything. They just eat it up, and it helps them restore and regenerate all the time, which is great because they're put through a lot kind of with all these digestive acids and enzymes and foods that might be irritating. Those cells turn over quite quickly. So glutamine is incredibly important, and it's a wonderful way to heal up GI issues. It's used in many, many applications. And an old-time naturopathic treatment for heartburn and for ulcers was to drink cabbage juice, which sounds really good, doesn't it? And it still works. It's not that it's old-timey because it's outdated. It's just old-timey because it was around for a long time, and a lot of people don't really want to drink cabbage juice. I have had people do it, and it really, really works. So again, bonus tip, if you have an ulcer or irritation, try some cabbage juice. It really does work. And there are other ways to get glutamine, of course, too. But then you're just getting glutamine and not all the other good stuff that comes along with cabbage juice with those sulfur compounds and antioxidants, among other things. And then cabbage is also very fiber rich, which of course is really important to our digestive health. It has both those digestible and indigestible starches that are super important. The indigestible in particular is wonderful for the colon. It helps the bacteria there to produce these short chain fatty acids that are really important for colon health. So fiber is crucial, and this cabbage is kind of a superstar for fiber. So I hope I changed your mind a little bit about cabbage, and then maybe you'll give it a shot. I actually prefer green cabbage in my sauerkraut. The red is good, it just has a very different flavor, and I think maybe I just haven't quite found the right spice combination to go with the red. Usually that can stand up to a little bit more stronger or stronger spicing, maybe like caraway seed and mustard seed, that type of thing is pretty nice with the red. The green, I love doing dill and lemon, and that's actually what we're gonna do here. So, and you can see the dill in it as well. It's amazing. It's super delicious. So, but yeah, the green, I don't know. It just tastes better to me. But feel free to experiment with your own, and yeah, hopefully you'll have some good ideas how to make your own after this video. Okay, so let's do a little overview before we go into actually making it. And by the way, I will have a little link to getting to the recipe, should have said that earlier, in the comment section or the notes section, so you can jump right to that if you would like. But I also think learning about cabbage is pretty cool, right? Right? Maybe. Okay, so how to make kraut. So it's seriously this simple. It's great. And again, this is not a recipe that I have specific quantities for. It's really tough, I think, when things, talk about like, oh, half a head of cabbage or 3/4 of a head or whatever it is. And then I end up wasting the whatever's left, which I don't like to do. I'll forget about it. So I will just use whatever amount of cabbage that I have. 1 head, 2 heads, great, okay, fabulous. Because sauerkraut, it's just all about proportion, and you do taste as you go along. So as long as it tastes good, that is the ideal. That's fantastic. So shred the cabbage. I use a little food processor that I'll show you a little bit later to get it really fine. I prefer mine pretty fine. And then number 2 is salt and season. So this is where you're salting to taste. And I will give you general guidelines about like, well, if you have about this much cabbage, this is probably what you want to use for salt. I do have to say that one time I made it just based on the recipe, with a certain amount of a certain quantity of cabbage and a certain quantity of salt, and it was really, really oversalted. Like I couldn't even eat it. It was so oversalted. So since I've been using this method and just kind of following my own taste preferences, it works really, really well. And then you'll have something super tasty that you want to eat. So you add your salt and seasonings, and then the third step is to knead. So you are actually kind of working the cabbage with the salt and the dill, and you're creating liquid. So that's really important. You want enough liquid and juice to kind of come out of the cabbage, that you've created kind of a line where your kraut will sit under. And that's why it's really important to use fresh cabbage as well, because it has a lot more water in it. If it's old, it doesn't have as much water, and it's a little bit harder to get more juice out and the kind of the plant cells broken down. Then we're going to pack it down. So again, talking about that water line, it's super simple. We just use cabbage leaves, and I have some rocks here. There are also specific fermentation weights that you can use. I just happen to like these rocks. I'm kind of sentimentally attached to them. I got them off the beach just down the way from my house and boiled them. And personally, I think the sauerkraut tastes better with them. That might sound crazy, but I do. I've used glass weights. Doesn't taste as good. I don't get it. Maybe it's some minerals in the rock. Whatever. I'm going to keep using the rocks. And then, so the 5th one is just to store it, right? Is that we have to wait for it to ferment. So a week minimum usually. If it's warmer where you are, a week could be totally sufficient. And then, yeah, I just do it in a cool, dark place, let it go, let it do its thing. You can see how it breaks down and changes color. You can see bubbles come to the surface, which shows you that fermentation process has happened. That is really it. It is so, so simple and so delicious. And I must confess that I did not like sauerkraut before I made my own, which is kind of crazy. But I really didn't. The store-bought stuff had this kind of weird, like, earthy, funky taste to me, but the stuff that I've made myself is bright and tangy and just really vibrant and delicious, and I love it. It's perfect condiment for so many things. This one is clearly savory. There are sweet things you can ferment as well to be able to add them to desserts or as snacks, but yeah, it's incredibly versatile and incredibly good for your health. Okay, all right, well, let's get to that recipe. Okay guys, here we are in my kitchen. We're going to dive into making sauerkraut. So I am just going to run you through all the things that I have set out here. So we'll start with the ingredients. We've got cabbage. I have this lovely green cabbage head, which I just like green cabbage for my sauerkraut, like I said before. I think it tastes really, really lovely. Sea salt and dill. That is it. That is our ingredient list. So Pretty darn simple. So I'm going to take you through all of the kind of the tools that I have on hand here. So I've got my lovely KitchenAid food processor, and the specific kind of center piece that I'm going to use is this guy here to put on in. So it's not the usual blade that you would see. And then we've got this special kind of shredder top there. I really like my cabbage finely kind of shredded rather than large. I'll show you the other blade that comes with it, and I've used this one before, but you can see how much bigger that will make the cabbage. It's a much chunkier thing. It breaks down a little bit less. You have to knead a lot more, and I think it's a little bit harder to eat. So I do generally prefer that that shredder blade. And then I'll take you back over this way. I've got my mixing bowl. So this is a pretty darn small head of cabbage that I am probably going to, from experience, I know that it'll probably fit in here, you know, to mix in and knead. So you can see the size of my hand here with the cabbage. It's probably only a couple pounds. It's about half the size, I would say, as I usually see. Yeah, so, okay, so we've got the KitchenAid mixer, and then we've got the top, right? So we're going to put the cabbage right through here. Fun story about the mixer. I have had this for about 12 years. It really endures. They are a little bit expensive, but this was my idea of fun in college. I worked a job at a fitness center my junior year over the summer, and this is what I decided to spend my money on. This and a Vitamix blender. That is how crazy I was in college, you guys. So I really haven't changed much, as you can see. So, okay, moving on. So this is my jar that I am going to store the sauerkraut in. You can see that it is a rubber gasket, glass jar. You don't want plastic, and the ball jars I've used occasionally, but unfortunately, because it's a metal screw top, the salt can corrode it. So I really highly recommend these jars that you can get all over. I believe this one has 2 quarts, and I have a giant one. I think I have a 3-quart one that I showed you earlier in the video. So this might hold all of it, it might not, but we'll just go with it. That's why I always have multiple containers around, because I'm never sure how much I'm going to make, just because I go based on the size of the cabbage head rather than by a certain like cup amount of cabbage. And then these are my rocks. These are my stones that I'm going to use to weigh down the sauerkraut to ferment it well. So I did gather these from my local beach and boiled them, so they should be sanitized, and yeah, I'm really excited. All right, so that's our general overview here. Let's dive into the action part. Okay, so here we are on our chopping phase. So I wanted to show you a little bit about what I did first. So the very first thing you want to do is take off the 2 outer leaves of the cabbage, or more, you know, especially if the cabbage is old or you need to take off some outer leaves just to make it pretty and clean it up. So these are going to be really important. They're going to play a role in helping us submerge the sauerkraut. We're actually going to put these in over the top of the sauerkraut and then put the rocks on top of this. So this forms a nice barrier. So these are pretty nice big leaves that stayed intact. So those are perfect. And then you can see that I've started to chop up the cabbage here. And I've done it in kind of small slices, small-ish slices there. And the only criteria here is that they're small enough to be able to fit into the food processor here. So you can see I can probably fit a couple here. You certainly don't have to use a food processor. I just happen to have one on hand, and I found it super useful. If you do chop it by hand, just make sure it's small enough and something that you might actually want to eat size-wise, right? So like something like this, a couple inches long and small might be appropriate. You just don't want it to be long and stringy or really thick and make it not fun to eat. And then, so you're going to use the entire cabbage except for the core here, right? You can see the core that we're going to cut around because that's way too fibrous to try to add in. So we just cut around that and use the rest of the cabbage. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get this all chopped up, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so you can see that I've got all my cabbage chopped up back over here, and I'm just going to show you how to use this food processor. It's very simple. So we've got kind of the maximum amount loaded up there. I'm going to turn it on. It's going to be very loud. I'm not going to shred all the cabbage here. But yeah, so I'm going to turn it on, and you can do on or pulse if you have that setting, and we're just going to push down this way. So here we go. Great. Okay, so you can see some of the cabbage leaves sometimes get stuck because they have a very high moisture content, but that's just fine. And you can see how fine we're shredding the cabbage here. So I'm going to go ahead and go do the rest of this, and then I'll meet you back here. All right, so on to our next step. So you can see that I've got all of my cabbage that's been fully shredded in this bowl. So this bowl ended up being a nice size. Again, this was a pretty small head of cabbage. It almost filled up the food processor bowl. Sometimes if the cabbage is large enough, I have to empty the bowl of the food processor, put it in here, shred the rest of the cabbage, then put it all in here, or a larger bowl. So the rest of our ingredients we're going to add here. Right, so I've got about a tablespoon of salt for this amount of cabbage to start off with. And again, it's nice because you just season it to taste. So this is all a guess. I'm guessing this is going to be light, but the important thing is to start light and then add more if you need, right? Because especially with salt, it can just be a little too much too quickly. So we're just going to dump that on in here. Good. Okay, and then we're going to add our dill as well. That's my main seasoning I like to add. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of lemon juice as well. Garlic can be okay too, but just watch it with the garlic. It can get very, very strong. And that's it. So now the next step we're going to do, the main step here, is we're going to start kneading. So we're going to distribute the salt and the dill all throughout the bowl as much as we can here. And this is a couple minute process, maybe 5 to 10 or so. So you're going to squeeze it. So it's kind of, you're just picking it up and squeezing it. And the idea is that you're really breaking down the cell wall that's left in the cabbage to release its juices, because we want this cabbage to be pretty darn juicy. So we can put it in, so we can put it in the container and have the liquid kind of cover all of this. It's not the end of the world if you don't have that much juice come out. You just have to watch it and make sure, because usually if there's enough liquid to cover all of the cabbage, then you're kind of ensured that it's not going to go bad or rancid or have something strange kind of happen. So you might be wondering why I'm wearing gloves. You certainly don't have to. I am wearing gloves for a few reasons. One, I always forget to take the cabbage out of the fridge beforehand, so it is really, really cold on my hands. This is kind of a paltry excuse for a layer, but so pro tip, take the cabbage out of the fridge and let it rest for a few minutes. And then also I was gardening today, and I washed my hands, but there's definitely still some dirt near the nails, so I like to use the gloves just for that purpose, make sure it stays really clean, because we haven't built up the good probiotic cultures yet. And then, I have these around my house, like all over the place, because I use it for patients. So they're just easy. They're just right there. Okay, great. So we are getting a little bit of moisture. I don't know if you guys can see that. We'll kind of move it this way. We're not there yet, but at some point it will be kind of pooling, and I'll certainly show you that. So this is kind of a nice initial knead here that we've got going, and I am going to actually kind of stop and taste things and season to taste that way. So I'll do that, and then we'll kind of keep kneading. All right, so I've been kneading the cabbage for probably about 4 or 5 minutes, and I did taste it using a clean tasting spoon here, and I think the salt was actually right on, and I ended up adding probably about a half a tablespoon more dill. So that's all I've done seasoning wise. And then I want to show you guys what it looks like when it gets wet here. You can see how it's clumpy. I'm going to hold this up, and you can see all the moisture running out, right, as I'm squeezing it. And then you can see, let me move it up here, see all of it right down here accumulating. That is exactly what you want. Now, if you have an older cabbage, or you're just not getting this much juice out of it, you can certainly let things sit. Let the salt sit for 5 to 10 minutes, come back, knead it some more. Because the longer the salt's in there, the more it's going to break things down, and the easier it's going to be to kind of knead and get some juice out of. But again, this is why it's really important to use a fresh cabbage, to be able to get this much water out of it with the salt there. Okay, so I think we're pretty done. I'm pretty happy with this knead. You can feel it, you can see it clumping together like it wasn't before. So now it's time to add it to our jar. So let me just move this on over. This is a really simple process. So here's our jar, and I am just going to take big kind of handfuls of it here and plop it right into the jar. that's about it. This is kind of a messy process, you guys, especially with the food processor. I mean, you will just have bits of cabbage all over. So maybe, you know, like wash the floor after, not right before. Don't clean your house right before you do this, or your kitchen. But that's it. Okay, so one of the important things here is you can see that I'm dropping it in, and then we want to pack it down. One, to try to get as much kind of moisture, again, moving out, and then, just really making sure it's, kind of tight down in there. And you can see, so this is a bit of a bigger container than I actually need for this batch, which is not going to be ideal. You really do actually want to try to get a container that's the right size, which is, you know, through trial and error, because the less air you have up here, the better, because air oxidizes things, right? And then it's more likely to spoil. So you do want to actually try to fill it up as much as you can. Okay, we're going to keep pouring this on in here. There we go. There we go. Okay, so, and then you want to make sure you definitely pour the good juice that's left there at the end on in. Okay, so that's it for this cabbage. So I do have another cabbage sitting around. I think I will probably go ahead and add that guy in here too, just so you can see a proper, properly full vessel. And it is just kind of a guessing game until you can figure out, oh, a cabbage equals about this, and it depends on how you cut it. You know, mine's very fine, so it's going to pack down really easy. If it wasn't as fine, it would not pack down quite as easily. Okay, yeah, so you can see I keep kind of packing it, and we've got some good moisture coming up, which is ideal. Okay, guys, so I've got my jar filled up now. And this is really about as full as you want it. Right at the neck of the jar, you don't want to fill it more than that, because we have to put in cabbage leaves still, we have rocks to put in, and then as this ferments, there's going to be liquid that comes out. Yeah, this will compress some more, but not a ton. You want to leave a little bit of headroom up here. Otherwise, it's possible that the fermentation process will kind of bubble over and it'll get really messy. So I did have a little left over from my second head of cabbage here, and I put it in a ball jar. Again, not full, not ideal, but I think that's okay. You know, I've done ferments at about this size jar. You know, clearly it's ideal if you have a perfectly sized jar, but that's not life all the time, right? Sometimes you just kind of have to do it. And this way, with the cabbage this low in this jar, even though it's a ball jar and I have a metal lid, the salt is really going to be quite far away from the metal lid. So if I had a smaller jar, I would use that, but that's totally fine. So, okay, so we've got this guy packed down really nicely and at the neck of this jar. So I'm going to take my cabbage leaves from earlier, right, this nice big one, and we're just going to situate it in here. Sometimes you need to rip them apart, sometimes you don't. This one is actually pretty perfectly sized, but if you have to use a few pieces, you know, from multiple leaves, that is totally fine. So this is meant to be a barrier between the kraut and the air. So this is a kind of a fail-safe to keep things fresh, and it's just a really easy, nice way to do this. And you can see too, I know there are jars out there that people use that have the little fermentation tops, right? So it's supposed to keep it more sterile. I've always just used these, and I've never had a problem with one going bad. Maybe that's just my luck, but I really like these jars. I think they're great. Okay, so we're gonna select some rocks here, right? So here's my first one, and we're gonna just weight it in here. So we're putting it on top of the leaves, on top of that cabbage leaf. Probably gonna end up with 4 or 5, depending on the size of the rocks I get here. And then we're pushing down a little bit, right there, so we can see the water line coming up. Okay, so I think I need just about one more here. Let me see if I can move you over to give you kind of a top-down view of what I've done here, right? So I've got all my rocks in here on top of the cabbage leaves. So that's all there is to it. Sorry, I'm going to put you down there. That's really about it, guys. So I always wipe off the container right around here. You can see it's a little bit jujy from all the salts and cabbage, and I just don't want those bits of cabbage to be there and kind of like go bad. So I wipe that off, and I can use a sponge or a paper towel or anything like that. And then we just close it. That is it. That is how you make your own sauerkraut. Look how pretty it is. So green and vibrant. It's just beautiful, right? And what we want to do is let this ferment for at least 7 days at a minimum. I usually like to do mine for a month because, again, there's some really good research out there showing that, a month in is about, when you start to develop really strong lactobacillus or probiotic cultures. And I always ferment it in a cool, dark place. I could leave it out on the counter and it would certainly ferment faster. Even when I leave it on the counter, I put like a dishcloth over it just to keep it dark. And otherwise, I kind of put it in a closet, if I'm being honest, and just let it kind of do its thing. And I have that other jar that's already done, so if we want to dig in and eat, we can. And you can certainly check in, after 7 days, see what you see. You want to see bubbles coming up. That means the fermentation process is happening. You definitely want to check in on it just to make sure it's still good and there hasn't been like a mold growth or some contaminant in there. Usually the salt content's high enough that's not going to happen, but it is good just to check in on it occasionally, and then you can see it'll turn a much darker color, right? This is way more vibrant than the one that I showed you in the video earlier, right? So as it ferments, it will turn a little bit more yellowish, that type of thing. So you can actually tell. And then of course you can taste test if you want, like see, hey, is it fermented or not? Pop it open, try it, see what you think. If you feel like it's still kind of tasting like raw cabbage, okay, let it ferment longer. That's all there is to it. Again, it's not an exact science, and this is really as easy it is. I mean, jar, salt, cabbage, dill. That's it. There you go. And you're on your way to some amazing, amazing fermented foods and wonderful probiotic cultures that are so great for your GI health. Hey guys, so I just wanted to clarify one thing I said about opening up the ferment. So if you do that, you want to do that really quickly or not even at all would be preferable. Just because when you open it up, it introduces the possibility of contamination, and then you're releasing some of those great carbon dioxide gases that are building up in the fermentation process. So the more you open it, the more it slows down the process, and then also it can open up some contamination avenues, and then your work will be for nothing. So you can pop it open to taste, but really patience is the best way to go here. So really try to hold off for at least a couple weeks, maybe even a month if you can. Especially if you're fermenting it in a cooler and darker place. If it's warmer, again, it might be a little bit faster. But yeah, I think that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope this inspired you to make your own sauerkraut, showed you how easy it is to do, and I hope you give it a try. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Take care. All right, realistic viewpoint of the aftermath of sauerkraut. Got it all over. This is just what happens when you make this stuff, So, yeah, just have everything ready, sink clean to rinse it out, and be ready to pick up little bits of cabbage for a while. But that's okay, because it's totally worth it. It's so amazingly delicious. So of course I dress up for you guys for the videos because I'd like to look nice and professional, but the parts you can't see, not quite as professional. Got some nice yoga pants on here and my 12-year-old Birkenstocks from college. That is the reality of things. I like to be comfortable. What can I say? Also, I've heard that Birkenstocks are making a comeback, which I'm super excited about. Yay for comfortable footwear.